Today we're working on the second prompt of the December drawing challenge, and today's theme is sending a Christmas letter. I've gone with the most obvious option of sending a letter to Santa. I'm working on a Procreate canvas and I've set it to 30 by 30 centimeters, 300 dpi, and I've set my background to pink because I'm illustrating a little mouse running across the snow, and I love how in the evenings and in the mornings at this time of year, the sky is always the prettiest shade of pink. I'm starting the illustration by blocking in the snow and the trees for the background. I've popped the snow onto one layer and the trees onto a second layer, and I'm using a dry ink brush for all of this, and I'm using the pink from the sky to act as some shadows and details in the snow. The goal of this drawing challenge is just to encourage me to take time each day in December to rest and enjoy some of the things that make this time of year so magical, so I'm keeping it really simple and not overthinking any of the details. It's actually really nice to draw the way I did when I was a kid, of just drawing trees how I picture them in my head instead of pulling up loads and loads of references like I normally would. I think references are really important, especially if you're working on an illustration that's based in fantasy like this one. I was listening to an interview once with Robin Hobb, who writes epic fantasy novels, and she said that the only way you will get someone to believe in your dragon is if they believe in your horse. And that really resonated with me, and it's something I try to keep in mind with my work, always making sure to add elements that ground the piece and that someone can instantly recognise, even if the rest of the illustration is a mouse wearing a duffel coat. But while that's true, I also think sometimes you can spend so much time referencing and researching that you can struggle to loosen up a bit and trust in your own knowledge. So activities like this, where you're just drawing for the fun of it, are so useful in helping to find that balance, and also just the joy of drawing and trusting yourself again. I live in England, so I've drawn a red postbox like we have here, and I turned on the drawing guide and set it to symmetry and drawing assist turned on for the layer, so that I only had to draw one side of the postbox and it would be symmetrical. And then I moved on to the little mouse. He was so much fun to sketch out. I've sketched him wearing a green coat and some checked woolen trousers, speeding across the snow with a giant letter above his head, which is probably not the most aerodynamic way to carry that letter, but he's trying his best nonetheless to get it to Father Christmas on time. I've drawn his body on one layer, his coat on a second layer, and his trousers on a third, so that I can add different details to each of them. I've also drawn him with a little candy cane in his pocket, because there is a legend that candy canes were originally invented in 1670 when a choir master in Germany gave young singers sugar sticks shaped like little shepherd staffs to keep them quiet during Christmas Eve Mass. And it felt quite fitting, because this looks like a really excitable little mouse who would definitely struggle with keeping quiet for any amount of time. For his red trousers, I'm using the same technique that I used for pyjamas in day one's prompt of reading a Christmas book. I kind of like the idea of the little mouse being so excited that he couldn't bear to pause long enough to even get dressed before just bursting out the house to run to the postbox. To do the gingham pattern, I've added 2 new layers above the trouser layer, and I've set them both to clipper mask, a screen and 30% opacity, and I'm drawing all of the horizontal stripes onto one layer and all of the vertical stripes onto another. By keeping them on 2 layers, it means that the opacity will be added together wherever the lines overlap, which wouldn't happen if I just used one layer. Once all of the lines are complete, I'm going to merge the 2 layers onto one so that I can erase the cuffs and then add some stitching detail onto the trouser and his coat. I'm using the little stitches to outline his pocket and then blocking in the traditional red and white of the candy cane. I tried to research into why red was added to candy canes, and it was really hard to find a verified source. There are some claims that it ties back to Catholicism, while other people think it was a purely decorative choice made when they became mass manufactured and people wanted to hang them on their trees. I block the red colour in first and then set the layer to alpha lock, which stops me from drawing anywhere other than the shape I've drawn, and then added the white stripes. Alpha lock's a really useful alternative to adding a new layer and using the clipper mask. I usually use it on things like this where there's such a small aspect of the illustration and I'm unlikely to need to go in and make any changes later on. It just prevents me from having too many layers, because although using separate layers is really good because it gives you more control over the different aspects of your illustration, having too many makes it really hard to organise your layers and you can get confused really easily or lose things really easily. It's important to use as many as you need without using too many and just getting lost in it all. Anyway, the next detail I needed to add for the little mouse was his scarf. I wanted to give the impression that he was like trying to run really fast, so I thought, as well as the position of his leg and his really rosy cheeks, a scarf flying out behind him would be the perfect way to show that. And I also really like the contrast between the stripes on his scarf and his jacket's trousers. I used the multiply layer first to add the folds into his scarf, and then I added a new layer and set that to screen so that I could add the stripes, and then finally I added white stitching so that it matched the rest of his clothes. All that was left to add to the mouse was his face, the details to his fur and his rosy cheeks. I also gave him two really big front teeth because I just thought it looked so sweet. One Christmas I lost both of mine together and my mum spent the whole season singing "All I Want for Christmas Is My Two Front Teeth" to me, and I didn't want him to have to live through that experience. I've given him darker, more rosy cheeks than I usually do because he's out in the cold, and then I'm just using a multiply layer to add some shadows to his ears and where his hands are holding up the letter. I actually think he might be my favourite mouse I've drawn this year, and that's saying quite a lot because I've drawn so many this year for some reason. I don't know what's wrong with me. I do draw lots of other animals. I draw lots of cats and frogs and raccoons and pigeons, but for some reason all I want to draw at the moment is just mice and mice and mice. I love this little guy so much. He feels so real to me and he made me so happy to draw. My drawing style recently has changed quite a lot from the work that I was doing earlier this year, and I'm so excited to carry on into 2025. Lately, because of the amount that I've been drawing, I've really been honing in on the type of illustrations that make me the happiest and that come most naturally to me as well. It almost feels as though these characters and these animals really do exist before I even start drawing, and my job is just to bring them to life. And it's such an ineffable experience to describe, and I know it probably sounds so silly, but it's such a wonderful and fulfilling and restorative way to create. My body is usually in so much pain after drawing, and I have to be really sensible and take breaks and listen to my body, but my soul never feels tired after drawing these, and it never feels like I'm running out of ideas or I'm being drained by them. It's more so that the more I draw, the more I want to draw and the more I need to draw, and the more these ideas are just like running in front of me and I'm trying to keep up. Anyhow, I'm now on to illustrating the letter to Santa. Instead of doing the outline details in the same way that I did the stitching by drawing each little stitch one after the other, because I need them to be in a straight line, I drew the solid lines first and then went back and erased it because it was just so much easier that way. It was so much fun to design a traditional stamp you really don't see them anymore. At least in the UK, all of our stamps have barcodes on them now, and some don't even look like stamps really. I send around 50 letters a week because I sell my work as art print, and all of those have really boring online stamps that you just print out and they scan. I think I've only seen the New King stamp once. I'm a big fan of the fun theme stamps that they sell at the post office. I wonder if they still run competitions to illustrate them. When I was choosing what prompts to include for the drawing challenge, I had so much fun learning about the tradition of sending letters to Santa. In the beginning, it was actually the other way around, and St. Nicholas would write to children to inform them of their behaviour over the year and all of the ways that they could improve, which is actually what the Tooth Fairy used to do to me. She was called Bluebell, and every time I lost a tooth, she would write me a letter telling me to make sure I cleaned my room and be kind to my sister. Anyway, in the 19th century, in 1871, Thomas Nast illustrated an image of Santa for Harper's Weekly magazine with a letter from a child instead of the other way around. And following from that, reports of letters to Santa ending up at the post office began to appear. As Christmas became more centred around gift giving, the tradition morphed into a kind of wish list service where children, instead of writing about the tales of the year or how their behaviour has been, would instead write about the gifts they'd want to receive over the Christmas period. Many parents, however, took on the role of Santa and continued the tradition, and Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, was one of those parents. Tolkien took so much time and care in crafting detailed letters with whimsical illustrations, bringing to life the adventures of the North Pole with such love and care, adding so much life and humour to the stories. Sending letters to Santa is a tradition that continues to this day, with different methods of postage being favoured by different countries. In the UK and the US, the postal service is preferred, but it's important to always get the address correct so it ends up in the right hands. In Scotland, children would stick their heads up the chimney and call out their letters to Santa, and in Latin America, letters would be attached to balloons. In other countries, they would be placed within the fireplace before it was lit, or they would be left in their shoes to be collected. I think it's so lovely how such a wonderful tradition has evolved and continued across so many countries and across so many decades too. And now you can even email Santa, so it's exciting to see how it will continue to evolve over the next couple of decades. For the final touch on the postbox, I'm just using the select tool to select 2 diagonal rectangles and then using the screen layer and a spray paint brush to just very lightly highlight across to give the impression of light reflecting off a shiny surface. The next step of the background is to cover the trees in snow. I've added a new layer above the trees that I drew in at the very beginning of the illustration and set it to clipping mask, and then I'm using the select tool to draw in the shape of the branches, and I'm very lightly covering the bottom part of the selected area in white with a textured brush. I'm repeating that process down the entire length of the tree, adding a new layer each time and repeating that process across all 3 trees. I thought about adding fairy lights to each of the trees, but in the end I decided to just do little tiny dots to act as clumps of snow. I'm so happy with how they turned out. I think it looks so effective and there's enough detail but not so much detail that it draws any attention away from the mouse. And then the last thing to do was add little mouse's footprints to the snow, And some final details to the sky. I've added a layer above the background and set it to multiply, and using a spray paint brush and the exact same colour as the sky, I'm just lightly darkening the top and the corner of the sky so that the area closest to the snow is the lightest. And I've blocked in 2 white clouds, and using the same texture brush, I'm erasing almost all of them but not quite, just to give that subtle soft impression of clouds in the sky. And then I'm using the same brush that I used to add the clumps of snow to the trees to add just little flicks in the sky. And now it's all finished. I'm actually so sad that it's over. I had the funnest time on this illustration. Thank you so much for drawing along with me. If you like this video, please do consider giving it a like and subscribing. I will include a list of all the prompts to the drawing challenge in the description if you want to draw along too, as well as all the brushes I used in today's video and links to my social media and Etsy if you'd like to support my art. Thank you so much, and I will see you on Sunday for the next video.